And as Sarah mentioned, most political leaders are presenting that united front, all but one. And we've talking a lot about this, about Premier Danielle Smith, who's expressed concerns about a Team Canada approach and did not sign yesterday's letter by Canada's premiers, calling the response misguided. Trudeau criticized the move, saying premiers should put their country first. So how is all of this playing out in Alberta? Well, Gary Marr is my next guest, CEO of the Canada West Foundation and a former Alberta representative in Washington, D.C. He joins me from Calgary. Gary, thanks a lot for your time today.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Give me your breakdown, your sense here. Danielle Smith straying away from that Team Canada approach, but very, very direct and staunch in terms of how she feels things need to be handled with Donald Trump and the United States.
Look, the Premier of Alberta went down to Mar-a-Lago, and some people criticize her for saying that, she didn't get anything out of that. And I don't think she expected to. But she is starting to build the relationship with the next president of the United States. She's also built relationships with governors in the U.S. There's 35 state governments that identify Canada as their number one export destination. 22 of them are run by Republican governors. The Premier went to the Western Governors Association meetings last year. She's signed an energy compact group with 12 U.S. states that produce energy. And so, look, I think that for people that have the opportunity, as I have, to watch premiers get together, they'll be impressed with two things. Mm-hmm. One is how much the premiers of Canada know, and two, how hard they work to protect the interests of their respective provinces. And I think Premier Eby's comment was notable. He said, look, you could be part of Team Canada. You might not sign the communique because you don't agree with a part of it, but that doesn't mean that Danielle Smith isn't part of Team Canada. I think the reluctance on the part of the Premier to sign on is because of the disproportionate impact that some of the ideas that are being put forward would have in the province of Alberta. So when some premiers say we should, put an embargo on Canadian energy, including electricity mm-hmm. and oil and gas, well, our total exports to the U.S. of electricity are about $4 billion, but oil and gas is about $150 billion. And so I think the Premier of Alberta is concerned about a disproportionate impact on Alberta. But moreover, I'd say this, an embargo may be very difficult to do because we move 4.3 million barrels of oil a day into the United States. You cannot simply divert it and you can't store it somewhere else. And maybe it's not a good idea because if President Trump, as he's promised, puts tariffs on, the ire of Canadians and Americans on both sides of the border will be on the president. Why would you want to displace, the ire that American consumers have paying more for gasoline? Why would you make the object of their anger Canada? So even if you could stop 4.3 million barrels of oil a day, maybe it doesn't make sense. And the last piece, perhaps, is the fact that oil goes from Canada into the United States, into Michigan, and then that pipeline, Enbridge Line 5, goes back into Sarnia and then reconnects to Montreal via Line 9. So if you stop oil coming into the United States from Alberta, you ultimately will end up cutting oil that goes into refining gasoline and diesel in Sarnia, providing energy to Ontario and the province of Quebec through Montreal. So I think she's reluctant to sign on to something if it hasn't been fully thought out as a good idea.
Yeah, because clearly sort of looking at the trajectory of all of this, it's not going to benefit anyone here. How are Albertans feeling about her stance on this? What are businesses saying?
Well, I think that where you stand depends on where you sit. Obviously, people from the oil and gas industry support what the Premier's saying. And, it is significant to also the revenues and the GDP of the province of Alberta. About 20 to 25% of both the GDP and the revenues to the government of Alberta come from the oil and gas industry. And I think that there are some people who are opposed to the idea that the Premier doesn't seem to want to play ball with the other provinces. But keep in mind that, sometimes, Team Canada really means Team Central Canada, and that there have been many occasions where the economic interests of Western Canadians have been cavalierly traded off. And a good example would be last year when, to support the auto industry in Ontario, 100% tariff was put on Chinese EVs. How did the Chinese retaliate? They retaliated against Canadian canola coming out of Western Canada. So I think that this is, I think the Premier wants to make sure that we're talking about the right things that will have impact, and trying to put a barrier on energy coming out of Alberta or trying to put a tariff on that energy probably isn't the right idea, because it transfers, again, the anger of people in the United States from Donald Trump to the Canadian government.
Before I let you go, Gary, I've got a few seconds left here. What are you going to be watching for? We're 5 days away now, I believe, from the inauguration there. What are you watching for now? As of course, we are watching things very closely from this stance.
Well, I'll be in Washington for the inauguration. I'm a guest of a member of Congress, and so I'll be there. And I think we'll see what happens on, on the 20th, on Monday night, how many of the executive orders that the president signs off on. I think that we are expecting that there will be tariffs, but we don't know lots about it. We don't know how much, we don't know for how long, and we don't know on what products it will be on. So the Canadian response should be based on what you learn after those things become disclosed. And so I'll be watching for, how long, how far, how deep these tariffs may be. And I would remind people that President Nixon put tariffs on Canadian goods back in 1971. It didn't last very long because of the inflationary result of those tariffs. I think they were gone within, 4 or 5 months. And so that may be the case on this occasion, but I would expect that he delivers on tariffs. But again, our response should be dependent upon what those tariffs do. And I would point out that maybe the president-elect is not negotiating with Canada, he's negotiating through Canada, and he's going to other trade partners and saying, if I'm prepared to do this to my best trade partner, imagine what I'm going to do to you, so you better get in line.
And inflation being something, as you mentioned there, something Donald Trump says he wants to eliminate. A lot we'll be keeping a close eye on. Gary, thank you so much for this. Gary Marr, CEO of the Canada West Foundation and a former Alberta representative in Washington, D.C.